Okay. So I think we all pretty much know each other and know our connection through sports. It seems to be the commonality. And I just wanted to just first of all thank Eric for coming in this way to talk without any preparation. I think we both trust each other enough to know, what respectful dialogue is. Uh, the other thing too is I think we're all stuck in this like foot in each world where we know someone or we're close to all this many different ways and angles, and it's just good to limit the discussion to people we can trust to help move us forward and also give us some hope. I do want to go back a little bit though, Eric. I don't know if you know that when I the reason why I met you, it had been a series of events that are all related, and there's a point to all this. But when I was a freshman, I was in Medill, and I actually my first story was in the Midnight Basketball League
Mhm.
when gang members would play like at midnight, 1, 2 in the morning, and I went down and I showed up and I'm like, hey, I'm a freshman, I'm going to write this story. So everyone was like afraid of me. They were like, what is she doing here? And then I actually followed up and went downtown because the guys like come play basketball with us. So I was like, all right. And then Stephanie Miller, who's now a judge, she went with me. So that was one story. And then the custodian at Northwestern, whose name was Fernando, and I had to write a big paper on one person. So he convinced me to write on his cousin, who was a Latin king. And I went down and I interviewed a Latin king, which I didn't know. I was just so naive. Like he was 11 in the morning and he, had just gotten out of bed. He was drunk because he was nervous. And then he was afraid because during the day it was dangerous. So I'm interviewing. And then I wrote this story and my professors are like, where are you going next? So what happened the year that we went to the NCAAs, in October of that year, Dontrell Davis had been shot. And to me, he was a 7-year-old boy who had walked 100 feet in Cabrini Green, and he was shot on the way to school. And here, I am, Wanensco, New York, reading all these papers, writing about gangs. I'm like, how does this happen? It was just so shocking to me. So that spring, I had my car, and I remember driving down. I volunteered at Cabrini. You know where the basketball courts were? There was a little community center, like a
Mhm.
little tiny building.
Yeah.
I went there and I taught the kids writing every week for like 6 weeks, and I would go play basketball there because there was a truce that I think you helped
Yeah.
solidify. So I was there, and the cops would drive by and be like, "What is she doing out here?" And then it
Mhm.
made the director so nervous. I think he just was like, "I can't handle the stress of having you here anymore." So it sort of we went different ways. But I did come up after meeting you at the Prairie State Games. So all these things had happened, and then I see you at Prairie State Games. I see 3 police officers rapping about good things, about trying to encourage kids to do the right thing. And I go up to them and I say, I have a big paper due. Can I write it on you? And the things I found out in that story. So this story is really long, and I read it again today. There's 3 things that I'll start with, and then you can take it over from here. But Eric's profile doesn't include that when he was 13, he was, one of 11 in your family. Was that right?
Yeah.
And you grew up in Cabrini,
Yes.
and you were shot in the stomach and in the calf in gang
Hmm.
activity. Okay, number one. Number two, you were afraid of the cops,
Yes.
right? But then all those things get buried in the Hakeem Olajuwon and Clyde Drexler and played against Jordan, and how you circle back. The second thing in the story of the 2 other Slick boys, uh, Fahim, Randy Holcomb, he was wrongfully temporarily in jail, right? A cop grabbed him, put him in jail, scared the life out of him. Unfortunately, some confessed. He was almost put in jail for a long time. He was afraid of the police. And then the third thing is that I found was surprising. Jimmy Martin was at West Point, and he served, and the line that I'm going to read here was that the military was a way to get out, and how hard it was, and getting through. But he came back looking for more opportunities, and it mentioned how, hey, we have some of your relatives in prison, and we all know police. And he said, if I'm having fun with them and I'm being open and firm, and he's speaking about family members, we can do a lot of good things. I'll be at my friend's house with 6 other people. I might have locked up 3 of them. I sent a cousin of theirs to the penitentiary, but we're all sitting there, we're laughing, we're watching. But I don't disrespect them as human beings, and that is the main thing you've got to learn. As you treat a man as a man and you don't disrespect him or lower his self-esteem, we won't have any problems. And I have a video that shows you guys in action. I found it, of you interacting with these kids. And I do want to play it at some point, and I'll go to the spot that I saw these guys in action. Now, if 22-year-old from Wine and Skill, New York, can walk up to 3 guys at a Prairie State halftime, event or wherever I was, and identify like something magical. And I wrote this story. I remember when I handed it in, the kid who read it, who handed it in because it was 5:30 in the morning, he was like, "You're going to get an A." My professor gave me an A. The dean called me, and I won the Hearst. And the reason why I bring all this stuff up is if I knew there was something magical about something you were doing, and that you were doing community policing before anybody else even called it that. Like, my question is, was anybody listening to you? Was anyone taking what you were doing and trying to implement it as the norm? Because that kind of seems where we are now.
Well, that's a great question. As a matter of fact, the Chicago Police Department at that time was implementing something called the CAPS program, that on paper really looked great and it really looked like it would work. But I think when the top of the department doesn't buy in, it's easy for the soldiers not to buy in. And you get federal funds if you say you're doing certain things. So they had a community policing program that they ran very lukewarm. It was very easy for myself and my partners to have a community policing program because every time I saw the kids in Cabrini, I saw myself. And it was easy to ask, what would 8-year-old Eric want? What would 10-year-old Eric want? And I knew what I wanted when I was 10 years old. So what we did is we implemented those types of programs and made those types of connections and built those types of relationships.
Do you, so were you trying to scale it? You were doing it because you felt it was the right thing to do, but was it proven that it was effective, or was there a way to get other people to think the same way, given how tough the public housing was, the size of the buildings, and everything that's happened since?
Well, absolutely, it was effective. Um, you mentioned the peace treaty. Because of our relationships, we were able to help create a peace treaty in Chicago that lasted almost 2 years, where the murder rate dropped by 50%.
Right.
And that didn't really make a lot of people comfortable. And if you look back at some of the articles, some of the main antagonizers of that treaty were politicians.
Mhm.
Well, they're still selling drugs. Well, they're still organized gangs. And what we really were talking about was stopping the violence. And I was probably 29 or 30 at that time. Um, and that's the one thing, Maureen, that I kick myself about, that if I had that opportunity again, all of the other pieces I would have brought and put in place. It wasn't enough just to say stopping the shooting and stopping the violence. We should have immediately came in with resources, which is funny to me when I hear defund the police. I'm like, yeah, you got to defund the police because you have to bring in resources to close that circle, to start building a new normal for folks in communities like Cabrini.
Mhm. Well, Camden is the perfect example in New Jersey. They did it. It was 2010 where they had, I think, 80 plus people who were wrongfully imprisoned or had been, given a hard time by a few police officers. So they basically cleaned house, and
Mm-hmm.
they started changing. They got rid of the union.
Mm-hmm.
I also think quota is a big problem because I did have an interaction with NYPD after Pantaleo was let off in New York, like the week after. And I also there were two officers who put a girl in a van while on duty, and they had sex with her. So I saw this police officer, and he was trying to get my kids in a picture because we were down playing basketball. I put up some nets. It was family day. I'm like, don't say anything, don't say anything. And then he wanted a picture. He wanted a photo op with my kids. And I said, I'm not happy. I'm just not happy with Pantaleo. I'm not happy with what you did to that girl. And he was like, pretty much, you heard what happened with that girl, right? And I said, what happened to an 18-year-old girl who was put in the back of a van, pulled from her friends, and the police officers admitted to having sex with her? What happened? He said, well, one was her boyfriend. I go, you mean to tell me the union has brainwashed you to think that was a good time to get in the back of the van and have two people do that to her, go to the hospital? 7 police officers showed up at the hospital to threaten her not to file a rape case. So I said to him, how come you're defending her, these animals? Like, how do you think that's okay? And he's like, well, no, I just want to go home at night. I go, so do a lot of black people. So like what are we doing? Like, that's not the excuse. So in New York, it just seems as though, for me, he said the one thing he said, and this will get back to, um, the one takeaway was he said he didn't like the quota he had to hit, like, because the stop and frisk, they had to stop and put their hands on people because
Mhm.
the higher ups were making them. And that's the one good takeaway. And this guy was really not, he was pretty cool with me considering he didn't know what he was walking into. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, we have to stop people. I don't like, putting my hands on people. And that came up when the whole Bloomberg and stop and frisk is just, I don't know. And I said to my niece and nephew, I don't know how I'd feel if somebody came up and put a police officer put their hands on me or those kids. Like, I don't know how I deal with that. So I think the quota is an issue with NYPD. The unions seem to be an issue. I mean, what else do you think works that you've seen?
There are a number of things that work. And then there are a number of things that work in different communities. And to be fair to the police, they are overburdened. You have many municipalities and towns that have cut back and rearranged dollars within their budgets. In Chicago, a big issue is mental health.
Mhm.
And speaking of defunded, they've defunded mental health and literally poured men and women out on the streets of Chicago. And I'll tell you, Mo, I got this much mental health training when I was in the police academy. Now you have folks that have psychosis, extreme behavior swings. You have someone that's untrained with a weapon. Enough of these encounters, eventually you're going to read about one of these encounters on the front page of the newspaper or see it on TV. And that's what we're seeing all over the country. And are there, and this is what we can't allow to happen right now. Are police departments a problem? That's simple. Yes, police departments are a problem. Are police departments the problem? No. It's the institutionalization of how Black and brown people are treated in this country. And there are a lot of people that need the finger pointed at them. It's easy to talk about the police because that interaction is easily taped, it's easily seen. You can make a quick determination. I spent a great deal of my time on the west side of Chicago, and you're familiar with that. And there are vacant lots that the kids at the base, who is the organization I currently run now for youth, that walk through a vacant lot that their fathers have walked through, that their grandfathers have walked through, that their great grandfathers have walked through. And if I took you to that neighborhood today, you would say, because of all that's going on, wow, the looters really did something to this community. And I would say, yeah, in 1968. There's been no investment here. You have struggling schools. The only resources they get are to be policed, to be policed. And that is problematic for the community. But once again, to be honest, to have a real open and honest conversation, it's problematic for the police too. Because what the police can't do, Mo, is the same guys who, I mean, when I worked the West Side, I was working against poverty. How do I police poverty?
Right.
And I didn't have to be a great police officer to feel and to realize that children that were in food deserts, heat deserts, home deserts, might sell drugs.
Right.
And now if Miss Jenkins calls, I'm going back to the same corner. I know the guys that are going to be there before I get there. They've hidden the drugs. I'm going to search them. They're tired of me searching them. And I'm tired of searching them. And it becomes this dance. But what you can't do as a police officer is decide, Miss Jenkins, I'm not going to even answer that call today.
Right.
And that wouldn't be right to do that. So I just want us to really look at the big picture to get real answers. It's going to be, and it would be easy, Mo, to say the police are the problem for Black America.
Right.
But it's much bigger than that. And the police department they're low on the food chain, believe you me.
Right. Well, I remember I was a substitute teacher both in New York City and in Chicago. And one of the most uncomfortable moments as a substitute teacher, and those of you who've been in and out of prison would know this, but the kids have to go through metal detectors.
Yes.
And that feeling is just as a teacher, I would go in and out. And the one I remember was at Senn High School.
Yes.
I taught there, and right when I went through the metal detectors, the all-white officers who happened to be in the office, they decided to walk me to my car at the end of the day. And the kids were just so disgusted by it. Like they needed to protect me. And it was, I just remember saying to them, don't ever walk me to the car again, because it was just so tense. And then in New York, when I taught here at Martin Luther King, King doesn't have any windows. It's on the interior. So they separate the kids so that they didn't have to cross in the hallways because there was problems. And in the interior of the classrooms, if you're having a problem, there's a trap door that another teacher can come in. But the entire first unit when you walk in is all of the school safety. So you have to walk through 25 officers every day to go to school. So I think it's the way they're dressed, that they're present all the time, versus the video I saw of you were plain clothed, you were leaning against a car, you were talking to the kids. You know, there wasn't this confrontational stance even. So I think it's just the image. And like you said, the police are getting blamed for this because they wear the uniform and there's cops and robbers, and it's easy to add the drama to this. But so what do you think structurally we would need to get the people in office who can then change the structure? I mean, what do you think is a good plan?
Well, when I was in the police academy, it was almost a military style thinking. And I've never agreed with that, because we're not going out to fight our enemy. We're going to work in our communities with citizens. Right. And in doing that, you have a structure that's been built the way it's built. When we did things like set up the peace treaty, when we did things like we set up the largest inner city Little League baseball program in the country. Mm-hmm. The problem with doing those things, Maureen, is that there's no box to check. And they have police officers all over the country built like robots. I have to do things that there's a box to check to get credit. Mm-hmm. Once again, they won't call it quotas, but in fact, it's quotas. Yeah. And who pays the price for those quotas? Usually young Black boys in particular.
Right.
I remember in Chicago, it had to be maybe about 2000. They said for juvenile crimes, we are now going to start fingerprinting. And I said, I need to hear that again. You're going to start fingerprinting juveniles? And they said, yeah, but we're going to throw it away and it'll be sealed. And I know the police department. I know that's not the truth.
All right.
So I had to correct and address myself. Mm-hmm. And what I did as a police officer then, if it wasn't a very serious offense, I mean very serious,
right,
and you were a juvenile, we were going to hold court right in the street, which usually meant me taking you to your uncle, your father, your grandfather, somebody. But I was not going to put you in the system that I knew them getting your fingerprints meant you were really going to be in the system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember my brother broke a streetlight. He just threw a rock at it. And Mr. Bailey, who was an officer, brought him to my father. Mm-hmm. And they took care of it, the three of them. Mm-hmm. I don't know what was discussed. I just knew I couldn't go on the porch. And it was taken care of. So and he never did it again. So it was better than any other option. The other thing too is, like in the case of the Central Park Five, or even in Randy Holcomb's case, where he's taken into custody by the police, and you don't have the financial means to like get yourself out of those messes. So mm-hmm. even if they're close enough, but not really, the trauma of it, the trying to financially get out of it, bail money, mm-hmm. That all has to be rethought too.
Absolutely. There's an issue that we spoke about 20 years ago. At Cook County Jail, it's summertime. You have a number of 17, 18, 19-year-olds in the county jail waiting for trial. and they're usually waiting for trial for selling drugs. It's hot in there, it's uncomfortable, it's overcrowded, and they're told, well, if you just take probation, you'll get out of here. And they'll ask, well, when will I get? You'll be out of here by tomorrow. And of course, a 17-year-old who's poor and uneducated and uninformed is going to take that deal. And he's going to take it not knowing that now you're a convicted felon. And now this affects the rest of your life. When it was probably a case that if you had an attorney, if you could have stayed the time in jail, you were going to beat that case.
All right.
But I understand too, once he's been there 2 weeks away from his family, he's hungry, it's problematic in there, he may not be gang affiliated. It almost forces him to throw his life away. And by the time they're 25, Mo, and they apply for a job doing whatever, and they're asked about their background, they can't even remember that they were arrested for something like that.
So I just have a question for you. If you grabbed the wrong person and put him in jail and then they got out, there's no penalty for you at all? Like, you can just, as a police officer, it just seems like a lot of people got away with grabbing the wrong people for a long time.
I think that there were a lot of arrests made of people that were poor people that couldn't defend themselves. And I think that still is a huge problem in many cities. I worked really hard to make sure I didn't grab the wrong person. And as a matter of fact, I'd rather grab no person. If it meant grabbing the wrong person, I'll grab no person. There are many times that I've brought guns in and drugs in with no body because I wasn't certain. I can't tell you that everyone thinks like me.
Right. Well, one of the boys in my high school who was the nicest kid, he was a few years younger, my brother's age on his basketball team, Dante. He finally came clean with a story his freshman year in college. He went to RPI, really smart kid, barely spoke, great athlete, sweet kid. A few Troy cops grabbed him one day and were just messing around with him and threatening him. And they brought him down to jail. Like, I don't know what the circumstances were, but he clearly didn't do it. He was crying like a baby by the end of it. And fortunately, I think the judge saw, what had happened. So I went back and forth with Dante, and I'm like, I think I need to write the Troy Police Department and just say this happened, and this kid never talked about it because he was scared. And then I looked up the officer who did it, and he became the head of the Police Benevolent Association.
Wow.
And he's retired now. He retired in 2014. But he didn't just do it to Dante. He had a partner. They all knew. And that's the thing is, like, when are we going to start speaking up in the way that I would speak up if a fellow teacher or coach was abusing a kid and scaring the life out of them and creating damage? Like, why when Jerry Sandusky got busted, everyone was upset at Jerry Sandusky for doing something so vile and terrible. No one was saying, well, coaches are really good people. No one was making excuses for him, right? He was a terrible person to do what he did. So it's just, for me, it's just so hard when abuse of power is as clear as it is and is now on video. Why are the police allowed to come up with all the reasons why, it's the job is that hard? Why? How many times did you see that? How disgusted were you with it? I mean, it just seems like such a flagrant abuse of power.
I'll tell you what, Mo. I was very fortunate to work with Jimmy Martin for 25 of my 27 years, and he is about the most honorable man, black or white, I've ever met in my life. He's a West Point guy who really believes in duty, honor, country, and I'll tell you numbers about the department that I was on. 20% of the men and women do about 90% of the work. 60% of the officers just show up on time, their uniforms are clean, they answer their calls, and they want to get off and leave on time. They don't want to do anything extra. They just want to show up for their shift, and that's it. And then you have 20% that probably needed to be fired yesterday for a plethora of reasons. They're racist, they're sexist, they're thieves, they abuse the medical, they abuse people. Everything you can think of is in that 20%. And I don't think that number changes as you go around the country. The problem is that the men and women I work with that show up and just want to do their job and they do their jobs well and effectively, that's not newsworthy. People will say you're supposed to do that.
Mhm.
It's the officers that do horrendous things.
Mhm.
And what's funny is that the department knows which individuals have that in them because they've been tracking them. They know that they're problematic.
Mhm.
And people think that there's this code of silence when really what it is, in Chicago, if you work with a guy that's problematic, you will probably go in and see the timekeeper. You'll tell the timekeeper, don't ever put me with him again. And the timekeeper puts you on a list of about 12 other people that says, do not put me with this guy.
Mhm.
So what they'll do is they'll try to find this guy a partner. Instead of dealing with him, they'll find a partner. And you know what's scary? When he eventually finds a partner. Because when he finds a partner, you know what you really have?
Mhm.
Two assholes
Right, right, right,
working together, probably going to do terrible things to the citizens of our city.
right. So you're working to avoid them, which is actually making the, not intentionally, the problem worse, because then they're just, no one's looking over them.
I'll tell you what police officers will say. Well, that's out of my pay grade. The supervisor knows.
Mm.
And you know what? The supervisor does know.
Mhm. Well, a lot of times the supervisors are the same way. I mean, it was just at the march, and they're not wearing masks. I mean, the guys in the white shirts, aren't they the supervisors?
Mm-hmm.
They're not wearing masks. So I walk by another guy and I'm like, why aren't you wearing a mask? And he's like, I'm not sick. And I'm like, the rest of us are wearing masks. And I would have gotten busted for coming back past curfew the other night because it's a rule. You can't be, but you're not wearing a mask. And my greatest fear was actually being around police officers not having masks on. If I
Mm-hmm.
got arrested, it was like, okay, if I got arrested, but if I had to go to the station and be that close to them, that was the greater risk. Um, and they just don't care. They just like, not all of them, but they were around Columbus Circle, and 4 to 6 of them didn't have masks on. Now, what more public statement can you make about feeling as though you're above the law and you're protected if the sergeant is not following the rules? So, well, what do you recommend? And then I can open it up to some questions. Uh, how do you deal with conversations with people who are anti-cop, who hate the police, who say F the police, when you're in a situation where I completely understand having hung out with Black Lives Matter and having the cops call my family because I hung out with Black Lives Matter. And being around them, I can understand how angry they are, and I understand why they say F the police, but I have a hard time saying it. I may believe a certain part of it based on what I see, but how do you deal with people who are so far on one side and you have other people who the first thing they point out are the looters? Like, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, for me, I'm really a guy about justice and right, period. I'm not here to defend the police and tell you that 13,000 men and women on the Chicago Police Department are as right as rain. I'm not going to tell you that, and most of the guys I know will not tell you that,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that would go with any department. Um, I think you have to figure out why you come on a job like this. And for me, Mo, I came on the police department because, my mother and father came from the South to Chicago for an opportunity. And, my mother and father have 6 years of education. And it wasn't because they only wanted 6 years of education. They only have 6 years of education because of stories like this. My mother, who turned 88 a week ago, was in school.
Mm-hmm.
She's in third grade, and the Ku Klux Klan comes to the school and brings them out of the class. And they burn the school down. And they tell them, if you're back in school when we come back next time, we're going to burn the school down with you in it.
Mm-hmm.
Because you should be out in the fields picking cotton and picking tobacco.
Mm-hmm.
And down in Tigersville, South Carolina, a lot of Black men went missing and boys. And the last person they were seen with was a police officer. So for me and my brother to come here and to come to Chicago and become police officers, the thing I remember the most about graduation day was what my mother told me. And she told me, really go out and protect the community. And really what she said is, go out and protect our children. And what was funny is when my brother came on the job 3 years later, she told him the same thing. And knowing the experience of her and my father, I knew what that meant. I knew exactly what they were talking about. So the issue with the police, it isn't something that started in New York a year ago or 2 years ago. This has been following our community since the days of slavery. And for me to get an opportunity to go back and work in my community, being the police, I was humbled and honored by that. And I treated it as though it were special because it was. And it was important for me to go back to my neighborhood and get out of the car. And I knew what I was when I stepped out of the car every day. I was a hero. I was the enemy. I was a potential husband. I was a friend. Just stepping out as a Black man in our community. And I embraced all of it. And I tried to be the representative of our community. I tried to be the representative of the Chicago Police Department to show them this is how you can do it. This is how you should do it. And for me, what I'm still really, really happy about, myself and Eddie Murphy, you remember that's what they called Jay?
Yep. I have it in my story.
No matter where we go, even today with my grandkids, people will come up and say, hey, 21, man, I love you, man. I love you and Eddie Murphy. I love how you policed. And that didn't mean you didn't do police work. But our community, which a lot of people don't know, is pretty conservative, actually, and really law-abiding. As long as you're fair, you can be firm and fair, but the operative word is fair. And we were fair every day, and probably to a fault. But you know what? I could sleep at night because I never put anyone in jail. If you had a gun, it was your gun. If you had drugs, they were your drugs. And there are many guys that eventually, because of my cases, went to jail, and it wasn't the first time I caught them with drugs.
All right. Well, I think the next big pivot that that everyone's gonna have to make is talking about what you just said, is money. You talked about those homes that parking lot that's vacant, that's still vacant. There's no economic development in these areas. And two is just showing a basic respect for people.
Yeah.
Again, I mean, people are so angry. And then how do you empower people? So it's like money, respect, and power. I mean, how do you tackle those three things? Get over this really hot moment right now, and then how do you go after those three things?
Well, I think, Mo, there are a few things that we have to do. I think that the movement must continue. The pressure in a strategic way must continue and come up with solutions that you have to give to those that represent us. But then, in particular in the Black community, we have some conversations that we need to have about education, about economics, about fatherhood. And we have to be tough with ourselves too. And I know we can be tough now. I'm positive we can be tough because I'm telling you, I'm giving standing ovations to the TV every day seeing our young people. I'm like, wow, these cats here are monsters, man. I love it. But now, can we be that tough on ourselves to correct the issues that are affecting our community that we can fix quickly? Because I'll tell you what, Mo, not only did we get the most powerful street gangs in this country to stop shooting at each other, you know, we went out because right after that, the Rodney King incident occurred. And Jim Brown called us out to meet with the Crips and Bloods and the Mexican Mafia. And we actually went out there and helped them put that treaty together too, right after the Rodney King. And I know the power of these young Black men. I know their power. They don't know their power, but I know their power. And they need to know their power.
Well, on that note, I just want to show everyone the clip that will show everything that was just said. And I found it. I'm going to share the screen. I'm going to start at the 7:30 mark because this is exactly why I came to you. It was in the aftermath of Dontrell Davis being shot. It was the truce, and there are images here that I think everyone should see of how involved you were in the community, including if you watch, you were on a bicycle, whereas other officers were in cars. You also put your weapons down and played in basketball games. And I think if you just take a good look at body language, if you read an article about the Camden Police Department, this is the new mentality, and you were doing it a long time ago. So let me share the screen. This is a 13-minute piece, so I'll play the clip that okay, here we go, I came across. Okay, so this is Cabrini Green, and maybe in the questions we can talk about, they knocked down Cabrini Green. So here's, okay, right about here.
An organization or a group, but it's one thing officially recognize them. It's another thing standing out in the corner surrounded by various members of gangs that are in a tinderbox situation. Certainly in that kind of situation, you're foolish not to recognize the impact these young men and women can have on the community. So it's a very realistic part of dealing with the community in Cabrini.
Guthrie supports innovative police work. He authorized the only bike patrol in Cabrini, and for these three, it was the perfect assignment. Full-time Chicago police officers, part-time rap music artists, the Slick Boys patrol Cabrini on their mountain bikes by day and make rap music videos by night. Rap with a different message.
Someone close to shot. Now the police stop to get hot. You're caught up in the gang.
Their music gives them a way to communicate with kids usually wary of police. All three grew up in or near CHA projects. Other than Guthrie, police brass were initially skeptical, but kept quiet when they saw the results. Results like the continuing peace in Cabrini.
We talk to all the different fractions in the complex and make sure everything is still, and plus they see they can give them our support. And two, we break down the barrier between the police department and the gang members. Because now they see the police not just as machines, but they see we're human also.
Now there are few kids in Cabrini the Slick Boys don't know. And even fewer kids who don't know the Slick Boys. Along with music, the three use sports to communicate.
Come on, ladies. Let's go.
The kids didn't know just how uneven the odds were. Eric Davis once played against Michael Jordan when Davis captained the University of Houston's 1982 winning basketball team. He also had a stint with the Houston Oilers. James Martin played his sports at West Point. Randy Holcomb at the University of Illinois at Chicago. They like the limelight, but say it doesn't matter if the gangs, the CHA, or the police get the credit for the peace in Cabrini.
I think maybe the Slick Boys are calling it the best. I think it's a project that everybody got involved in because everybody was frustrated with the killing and the drive-bys and the violence, and everyone was tired of it and everyone wanted it to stop, and everyone's working hard to keep it that way.
There's also some skepticism about how long this will last.
Well, I tell you, 4 months ago, everyone said another week. 6 months later, they still hollering maybe another week. You know, Slick Boys know that it's going to go on as long as we're here, because like I said before, we go around, we talk to them, we ride these bikes, we talk to different leaders on a daily basis. We ask what the problems might be. We offer some solutions. They're out here now, and they look for us. So as long as Slick Boys are alive and kicking, you're gonna have peace in Cabrini.
The first big test of the truce came 8 months after Dontrell Davis was killed. On a hot midsummer night, shots rang out. 2 young men, one only 14, the other 18, were gunned down at 3:30 in the morning as they stood in the entrance to the building where Dontrell Davis had lived. Cabrini held its breath. Was this the end of the peace? The 18-year-old who died was a gang member, the triggerman a member of a rival gang. The Slick Boys hit the streets. They wanted to know the facts, and they wanted the truce to hold.
It's about trying to keep this thing intact.
And I mean, you got to do whatever you got to do to keep it intact for these shorties, you know? I mean, it'd be easy for y'all. If y'all didn't want peace, you know what you had to do? My beeper rang 25 times today. If y'all didn't want peace, you know what? My beeper didn't have to ring at all. Y'all know how to get up in these buildings and come on down to this field and tear ass off. Y'all have been popping already. You know that and I know that. So I think somewhere in your hearts you know that ain't the right thing to do. You know? Y'all don't have need no permission to start this shit back up. Y'all man. Y'all ain't starting it up because you know it ain't the right thing to do. Man, don't start killing our community. Don't start killing our community. That's all it's gonna do.
All day, police, community organizers, gang leaders worked to keep the lid on. They learned that the killings were the result of a love triangle. Commander Guthrie wanted the community to know that.
There was gang connotations involved here, but everyone here understands, you know, the people on the street as well as the police, that this was not a gang incident. It didn't start a gang incident. The gang truce, as they talk about, is not over. There's no gang war. This is an unrelated, separate incident. An incident could happen in any section of our city.
At first, Fred Watkins wondered if all his work on the truce had been lost.
What would the usual reaction be before the truce if something like that had happened? Even though it was over a girl.
All that gang war. You know, told you one was like your nose. All that gang war. You know, but unfortunately, you know, people got out quickly and, you know, let it be known, no, it's not over.
Activist Marion Stamps was still nervous.
Some people don't understand that 8 months of peace may not seem like no long time for them because they've had it. But 8 months of peace for us is like 8 years. And every month we count it as a year. You know, and when we get to 12 months, we're going to be straight.
The shooter was arrested, and the peace is still holding at Cabrini Green. Thank-You Selby can walk through Cabrini without looking over his shoulder. This summer, the bullets he had spent much of his life ducking were gone.
Well, that was excellent, and I'm so glad I found it. Really, that captured it all. It really did. And the most noticeable thing to me is all the kids were around you, and all the kids really liked you, and we don't have that right now.
Well,
So
I'll tell you what, Mo. I love my neighborhood, and this is just such an easy thing to do if you just commit yourself to this. It doesn't, and it shouldn't be like it is. All you have to do is want to do this. You cannot treat Black people like the animals.
Yeah. Or anyone. And if you tolerate anyone treating anyone as like an animal, then we don't live in a civilized society. And finally, as one of the few white people who have shown up, I cannot believe the number of white people who have shown up.
Yeah. And that's been a great look. That's been a great look. And you know, to have a discussion about what happened to this treaty eventually, that really is causing all the violence you see in Chicago today, is that about 2 years to the day of the treaty, things were still quiet. Mm-hmm. The FBI went and locked up every leader of every gang we talked to, knowing that that would cause chaos. Mm-hmm. Were they organized in selling drugs? Yes, they were. But were they instrumental in keeping the streets safe for those communities? Yes. And there are many nights I stay up and think that that was done with intent to get the result that we see now. It's hard for me not to believe that.
Yeah. I mean, I just think some men are really, they like conflict, they like violence, they want to fight. They're just, that's what they want. And unless we start hiring more diverse staff and people who can empathize and be compassionate, and unless we hire more women, I don't know, the status quo will be the status quo until we break it up. So on that note, any other comments that you have about, what we can do? I mean, should we be going to the precinct meeting? Should we be joining the community board? What should we be doing both, aside from protesting, what other actions can we take?
I think you have to be a participant in what you want the future of policing to look like. Chicago has the last 3 or 4 tests had a very difficult time trying to get women, Black and brown children to sign up for the police department. We have to participate from within on that job too, because a lot of what you saw in the video was their comfort level of someone that looks like them coming up to, I wouldn't even say police them. I mean, most of the time it was to come up and buy them potato chips and pop, because I understood every situation that was there. The domestics that I went to, before I got there, I knew the situation. I see a kid out at 6 o'clock who I saw out at 3 o'clock, and now I see out at 7 o'clock. I know he didn't eat dinner. So I gotta at least say, here, come on, let's go get something to eat. And I have to do that so negative influences in the community don't start to feed him, to start pulling him in to a negative lifestyle. At least you can have a relationship with me, and I don't want anything from you. I just want you to be 8. I just want you to be 9. And once again, I don't know if it works like this where you're from in New York, but you saw how the buildings were there in the green. I mean, you know how many cousins I had who weren't my cousins, but they're my cousins because we slept in the same beds. We didn't lock our doors. I could walk into their house. They could walk into mine. I ate out of their pot. They ate out of my pot. And that type of feeling and relationship, you can't just shake that. And you ask about how do you balance being the police and being Black? The day I retired from the police department was my birthday, and I was 50 years old, Mo. You know how many years I had on the Chicago Police Department? 27. You know how long I've been Black? 50 years. I don't have to tell you where my loyalty lies.
All right.
And I love the police department. I love what we were able to do on the police department. I love what the potential of the police department can be. Was the police department a great place to be a Black officer when I was on? Probably not. I had some issues with all kinds of officers. I had issues with white officers. I had issues with Black officers who said, if all I have to do is stand on the backs of my community to get a promotion, I will. It's a lot of them. It's a lot of them. And they hurt my feelings more than anyone else, if you want to be honest about it. And you know what? There were many things they did to try to stop us, to sway us from our way of thinking. But I took an oath to the city, and I worked for the citizens of Chicago. And really, I worked for Adele Davis and William Davis. And when I did wear my uniform, which wasn't very often, but when I did, the most important thing on my chest wasn't my badge. It was my name tag. It was my name tag who, when I wore that, I thought of, there's a picture that my mother has here. And the picture is her with her grandfather. And his name is Henry Gibson. Henry Gibson is the last slave born in my family. My great-grandfather, born January 15th, 1861. And I wonder what kind of police officer he would have been. And my grandfather and my father, but they didn't and weren't given those opportunities. So when I put that badge on and my brother puts that badge on and we go out there, we have to be the type of police that they would have been, that they want us to be. So I did exactly what my mother said. The mayor didn't tell me anything. The superintendent didn't tell me anything. I did every day what my mother told me to do on the police department. Take care of those children in our community.
Yeah. And I would think that police officers who feel as strongly as you do about having a true commitment to people will be open to rethinking this. If they've seen the same things that you've seen and they're willing to stay on board, they will do whatever it takes to make the world the better place to serve and protect the children. And those who don't, we don't need them.
Well, I'll tell you, one of the best things that happened to me on the police department was my first assignment. And my first assignment, I was sent to Humboldt Park, which was probably 98% Puerto Rican Hispanic. And I loved it. It was like going to Puerto Rico every day. And I said, you know what? I don't know that much about this, but I'm going to get out and try to learn. And I learned how to salsa. I learned what food I liked. I learned how to speak Spanish. And what was funny is they tried to get me to leave and I wouldn't leave. I'm like, no, I'm staying here for 27 years. Why would I leave this? And then I went and worked in a district called Austin, which is predominantly Black. And got there and loved it. Did the same thing because I'm a North Sider, hadn't spent a lot of time on the West Side, and I'm on the West Side every day now. And I still know a lot of friends at the base from my time when I worked on the West Side. And just taking yourself and throwing yourself into it and really saying, you know what, I'm going to get the real social piece of this policing. Because I was a sociology major in college. And you know what? Policemen always say things because they watch so much TV themselves. You know, I'm not a social worker. Yeah, you're a real tough policeman, I know. But you know what we really are as policemen? Social workers.
Right.
With a gun.
Right.
Because most of the stuff we deal with is social work. And it was such a wonderful opportunity for me. But I didn't define myself by being a police officer. Right. And sadly, if you're weak-minded, or if you're coming on this job for this job to build out some weaknesses that you have, this job can be a very dangerous job to that officer and to the community.
Right. Yeah, I mean, so some cops who shouldn't be cops, and they get into it, and it's hard to get out of it. And but there's also ones who are fantastic. And that's like you and like other people we know. So I just wanted to say thank you for doing this, and thank you for the trust you have in me and my friends, and the fact that I think we all stay in touch over these issues. I know some of you have been really torn up, as we all are, and have been hesitant to say anything, to do anything. You're just trying to process it all. But if you have any questions right now, if you'd like to ask or share some of your thoughts at a later date, I'd love to have any questions you have or any ideas.
I actually, well, Mo, I just want to say one thank you for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. Mr. Davis, I just have to tell you, it is an absolute honor, sir, to meet you. I worked in the Byrd School when I was in graduate school. And I felt my heart swelling when you were talking, because I was very much in that space working with those kids who just wanted to get to school safely every day. And I distinctly remember having conversations with some of the babies, and that's what I called them, my babies, working with them about whether it was drawing pictures or just having conversations about what is safe to you, what feels safe. And I cannot tell you how many times I heard Slick Boys. So everything that you all did was definitely worth it, because those babies felt wrapped around by the three of you. And it's just amazing to me in this moment to be sitting in front of you 20 plus years later and have an opportunity to hear this directly from you. But you and your two brethren absolutely took care of that community in ways that I know those youth who hopefully have lived until now are still carrying with them, because you definitely planted seeds in them and made them feel a sense of safety when every almost waking moment of their lives was dangerous. I remember sitting in the classroom and you know, ducking down and, you know, walking kids from the playground into the school building with gunshots ringing out around us. And Mo, I was in graduate school then, and people would ask me, what the hell are you thinking? Why would you work there? And I'm with you. I didn't grow up in Evanston. Though those were my people. My people were in New York and you know, housing projects in New York, but I find my people wherever I go.
There you go.
I just wanted to your point, Mr. Davis, that you made before about mental health coming. I'm a clinical psychologist and I work in the correctional system, in the justice system. I worked at Cook County Jail for many years, and now I'm in DC working in the juvenile justice system there. And it is just astonishing to me, and it's so hard to have a discussion about how, like, we can't say it's bad to say defund the police, but as you mentioned, we've defunded mental health to such a degree. You know, for the time that I was here in Chicago, I could see the direct correlation between the beds closing, the inpatient beds and the outpatient facilities around Chicagoland area closing, and my census spiking at the jail of mentally ill people to astronomical proportions. And so in order to kind of right size that, how do you have that conversation? Like, I literally, and I told Mo when she asked before, do you want to talk about this? I'm like, no, because I'm so angry and ready to pull my hair out, because I haven't been able to have a rational conversation with so many people, because all they hear is defund the police and everyone wants to close their ears, instead of really understanding it as a reallocation of resources to right size the police. And I guess for me, you know, the snarky side of me, I'm kind of like, well, didn't y'all say you ain't no damn social workers? So now I'm trying to get the mental health dollars back to the social worker and take them away from you. And you don't want that either. What the hell do you want?
Well, you know what's funny about mental health? The first stop, honestly, is at the police department itself. Many of them suffer from PTSD and wouldn't know it, and don't know it, and don't want to believe it.
Yep.
You can tell by the divorce rates and the suicide rates.
Yes.
So that's one conversation. The other conversation are these young kids who have lived in war zones in our city for years. They definitely need it. You can't have the conversation about how do we stop violence in our city until we bring in mental health, because our kids are shell shocked. Our kids are carrying guns. Good kids. Why are you carrying a gun?
I'm scared.
I carry it because I can't get caught without it. You're not in a gang. You're not a troublemaker. I just can't get caught without a gun out here, sir. Yep. And of course, our kids in school need it. So I think if you can show people the why, and what's not going to happen is we're not going to arrest our way out of any of these issues. In particular here in Chicago, they've tried. It is not working. There has to be a 4 or 5 pronged approach to doing this, and right in the forefront is mental health.
Well, one thing, I follow a person in Chicago who is big in technology, and I'm sure you've heard of the whole system where they can detect the gunshots. So knocking down the public housing ended up dispersing a lot of the problems. And like you said, you had a sense of community in Cabrini. So when you knocked it down and you spread it all out, people lost a sense of community. And my friend who was in the technology part would track the gunshots, and they would try to come up with patterns to predict the violence, right? And then I started reading more and more about it, and the kids had like one social worker at their school for every 700 kids. Number one. Number two, the only correlation between technology and adding more police to the neighborhood, the one thing that was proven to work, it wasn't adding more police. It was for every nonprofit that you added to the neighborhood, the crime rate would come down. So the solutions are, you know, basically add more nonprofits and try to rethink policing, and then add more social workers. You know, one social worker for 700 kids in some of these places is just, convert those police officers who, like you said, they show up at work and they're not really doing much. Like, have them go be social workers, right? Or have other people take their spots.
Well, the thing that we did when we were the Slick Boys that a lot of people didn't see, and many don't know about probably, is that while we were the Slick Boys, we actually created a TV show called New York Undercover. And we took our money from New York Undercover and created computer centers, safe zones for kids to do their schoolwork. And in the daytime, we would use them as adult learning and GED centers. And by being the police, we had a real easy segue to get all kinds of people to come by and be resources. And what I find now is what many of the communities like Roseland and West Garfield Park and Inglewood lack is just knowledge of real viable resources that'll help. And we were able to do that and put pressure on CHA, and mostly because we were the police. And really what gave us a huge head start is I didn't have to ask anyone for money because we had Hollywood money. And I know what the impact of money in the right hands can do for a community, whether it's in New York, whether it's in Boston, whether it's in Chicago.
Right. So what are you doing these days aside from, being executive director? Are you still involved as a consultant? You should be.
I have 362 amazing kids. Yeah. And they have every problem in the world. And I'm busy being daddy, uncle, granddaddy. I really love the grassroots portion. That's what I live for. Right. As you know, I was working with Major League Baseball before I went over there. And that was great. And it was easy to do because you say Major League Baseball and everybody wants to follow you. But working with the organization called The Base out of Boston, Robert Lewis does an amazing job. He's created an amazing, it's like the Slick Boys. It's the Slick Boys 2.0. It's the modern version. Right. And he was doing it out of Boston. Now we added what we do in Chicago along with a gentleman named Frank Brim. And I'm dedicated to the West Side. And until I get some kids in Harvard and Yale and Princeton, I'm not focusing on anything else. And for me, my time of being the hero, the guy in the front, that's over. Yeah. I see great heroes on TV that are 20 to 35 or 40 every day, and I'm cheering for them, Mo. I can be in the back. I got a lot of good information for them. I can tell them where the bodies are buried. They can always call me and come and see me. That's my job now, to uplift new kings and queens.
Right. That's great. Very good. Anyone else have any other questions or comments or? All right. Well, wait, do you have something? Can I unmute you? Hold on a sec. There you go. Hit your audio. There you go.
There we go. Yeah, thanks for inviting me, Mo, and Mr. Davis. I appreciate everything you said and everything you've done in the community over the years. One question I had, I was having a conversation with a gentleman, and he had mentioned Pastor Corey Brooks. Mm-hmm. Are you familiar?
I am familiar with him.
I just want to get your opinion on the things that he's doing.
Corey's doing a number of things and was doing a number of things. There is some strife now because Pastor Brooks and the Republican governor kind of made a partnership that caused some strife in the community. I think what he did was he wanted to put the Democratic Party here on notice more than his heart was into it. And I think then Governor Rauner needed him. Mm-hmm. So they kind of needed each other. I think for the most part, what Pastor Brooks does is great work, and it's needed on the south side of Chicago.
Okay. Yeah, that's kind of what I thought. I don't live in Chicago anymore. I live in Milwaukee, or just outside of Milwaukee. And from what I
think that's the north side of Chicago now.
Yeah.
Basically, don't say that too loud. Yeah. But from the person who it was coming from, I kind of knew there was something there that where he probably was in with somebody on the right politically. But I didn't want to say anything until I heard from somebody who was a little bit closer maybe to what was going on.
Him and Pastor Meeks, what the community feels is they feel they jump ship. I hope it is more of just to tell the Democratic Party that you're not automatically going to get our support, that you have to earn it. And if I hear that from their mouths, I can respect that. But here's the real truth of the matter. When I was a young man, when my parents were young, you could go gather up the religious leaders and they were the voices of the community.
Sure.
There are new voices. Let them have their time on the throne. We've carried it, and now they're going to carry it. And part of the problem is sometimes, Dwight, we don't know when to get off the throne and allow the new kings to get on the throne. It's that time.
Okay.
Fair enough.
All right, well, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, this has been helpful and cathartic and therapeutic, I think, for us to get together and talk about great police work and public service. Thank you to all of those who do it. And if you have any questions for Eric, I have his email, and you can reach out to me. And if there's any ideas of events or anything that comes up, please share it with me and I can share it with the group.
Don't forget, Mo, stay local. Stay on your department's local.
Yeah, it's right.
World.
It's right up the block. And I coach against Milbank, which is the premier program in Harlem. And I coached against an NYPD who's a friend of mine. He's a wonderful guy. And a referee was giving me a hard time. Like, he was just making this weird call. I mean, I played for a while, but he warned me in a 6th grade game. Just seemed really uptight. And I said to Wayne, what did he warn me for? I don't even know what I got warned for. He said, the kids are rushing in the game. And I said, okay. So I told the kids, because it's loud and the kids sometimes just run in the game. So I'm like directing them to go to the table, go to them, like, hurry up, the clock's running. So I got warned for it. And he's like, if you do it again, I'm going to give you a T. And this is a 12U game. And this is ridiculous. Like, I've played my whole life. They think I'm somebody's mother. I'm like, okay. So I looked to Wayne, and Wayne's like, he did it to me last week. So we lose, and I leave the gym, and it was a pretty tight game. The crowd was crazy. It was loud. And Wayne calls me later, and his assistant coach got 2 Ts and got thrown out. And I said, how did that happen? Because I know the guy, and I didn't see him acting up. And he said that ref was really tight. The ref was really odd, and da-da-da-da. So I called the head of the assigner, and he said he's a lieutenant in the NYPD. So I thought it was like, okay, we have a very sensitive lieutenant. So then I had to call Lowe back, because I was like, I don't want to get in trouble, because he doesn't know he's, his superior. So I see Lowe all the time right over here, and he invited me to the precinct meetings a year ago. He's like, Mo, nobody goes to the precinct meetings. Will you show up? So I went, and apparently you have to go to 3 of them consecutively to then qualify for the community board. So I'll have to reach out to him, but they're like the 2nd Wednesday of every month, or 3rd Wednesday, and you go, and we'll see. But Black Lives Matter is getting stuff done here, and I know the people who are in charge, and I go and I stand in the back and I clap for them and I video them. And what the co-founder is running for Congress, so she has an election in the primary in 8 days. So I'm going to go make calls for Shavonna. Initially I thought she was pretty, militant. I thought she was a little far on some things, but she's there to represent her people. That's the most important thing, is we need her representing her people. So I'm going to do my best to support Shavonna, and I'll go to the precinct meeting. Should I wear my Kaepernick shirt? No, because like one of my military friends is like, when I was coming back into Penn Station, and he was texting with me, and he's in the military, so he can't say anything, and he's like, can you take the Kaepernick shirt off? Can you just take it off for like the 20 minutes you got to get home? Can you cover it at least? So I was like, all right. Anyway, thank you so much. And for those who are listening, by all means, reach out. And I hope to see you the next time I'm in Chicago. I'm for sure going to see you. When I get there, I don't know.
I look forward to seeing you. I may be out in New York once things get better.
Okay, that's great. Reach out.
Okay.
All right,
thanks
you,
everyone.
so much.
I appreciate you all.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Everybody.